Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
Nobody told Gwen Tallis that the third researcher would come out screaming. She stood behind the observation glass in the medical wing of the repository, watching two medics hold down a Paliki archaeologist who had been perfectly fine 6 hours ago. Now he thrashed on the table, all four arms clawing at his own face, making sounds that Gwen had never heard from any living creature. Not pain exactly, something deeper, something that sounded like his mind was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. Director Sohal Brun stood beside her, his tall insectoid frame completely still. His mandibles clicked once, softly, which Gwen had learned meant he was afraid. "That is the third one," Brun said. "Three researchers in 11 days. All from the Rethani vault. All with the same symptoms. Emotional collapse, so severe their neural pathways are physically damaged." Gwen pressed her small, furred hands against the glass. She was miry, barely reaching Brun's waist, with round dark eyes and a body built for burrowing, not for standing in medical wards watching colleagues lose their minds. "What is down there?" she whispered. "Blades," Brun said. "Thousands of them. Sealed for 4,000 years." The initial survey team opened the vault 30 days ago and began standard cataloging. Nobody expected this. He turned away from the glass. "The compact has given us 90 days to complete the catalog or they revoke our charter. The entire repository, every artifact from every dead civilization we have preserved for centuries. Gone. So what do we do?" Brun's mandibles clicked again. "I sent for a human." Gwyn stared at him. Humans were rare in this sector. They came from a death world on the far side of the spiral arm. A planet so hostile that most galactic species refused to believe intelligent life could evolve there. Gwen had never met one. "What kind of human?" she asked. "A cultural grief specialist." "A what?" "I do not know either," Brun admitted. But the human embassy said she was the best they had. Nadia Osei arrived on Dullhaven 3 days later aboard a cargo shuttle that smelled like engine grease and recycled air. She was smaller than Gwen expected. Humans were supposed to be death world predators, thick with muscle and heavy bone. Nadia was lean and quiet, with dark brown skin and short hair and eyes that seemed to be looking at something slightly behind whatever she was facing. She carried one bag and a battered notebook with actual paper pages, which Gwen had only ever seen in museums. "Thank you for coming," Gwen said, because Brun had assigned her as Nadia's escort, and she did not know what else to say. "Thank you for asking," Nadia replied. Her voice was soft, calm, like someone who had been tired for a very long time and had made peace with it. Gwen led her through the repository. It stretched for miles underground, corridor after corridor lined with sealed display cases holding the remains of civilizations that had destroyed themselves. Weapons, tools, art, religious objects. The silence was enormous. Nadia walked slowly, pausing at certain displays. She would stop, place her fingertips against the glass, and close her eyes. Sometimes her lips moved slightly, as if she were reading something written in a language that had no sound. Gwen found this deeply unsettling. They reached the Rethani vault entrance, where Brun was waiting with a security team. He explained the protocols. Environmental suits. Scanner drones for remote analysis. Absolutely no physical contact with any artifact. Nadia listened to everything. She nodded politely. Then she asked a question that made the entire security team go quiet. "How did they die?" "Not the species. The individual people who made these specific blades." "Do you know how each of them died?" Brun's mandibles parted slightly. "No, we do not. That level of individual data has never been recovered from Rethani artifacts." "All right," Nadia said. "Open the door, please." The vault door was 3 meters of reinforced alloy. It took 40 seconds to cycle open. Cold air rushed out, carrying a smell that Gwen could not identify. Not decay, not chemicals. Something else. Something that made her fur stand on end and her stomach clench for no reason she could name. Nadia stepped through the doorway and stopped. She did not move forward. She did not reach for anything. She simply stood in the entrance of the vault, surrounded by rows and rows of ancient blades mounted on racks behind stasis glass, and her eyes filled with tears, She had not touched a single object. She had not activated any scanner. She had barely looked at anything specific. She just stood there, and the tears ran down her face, and her hands trembled at her sides. "Oh," she said very quietly. Her voice cracked on the word. "Oh," they were so afraid. Gwen looked at Brune. Brune looked at Gwen. Neither of them understood what was happening. The vault was cold and silent and full of metal that had not moved in 4,000 years. But the human was weeping, and somewhere deep in Gwen's chest, in a place she did not have a name for, something very small and very frightened whispered that maybe the human was right. Maybe there was something in this room that the scanners could not measure and the drones could not see. Maybe the blades were not as quiet as everyone thought. The notebook was the thing that bothered Gwen the most. Every morning for the first week, Nadia entered the Rethani vault carrying nothing but that battered paper notebook and a short pencil. No escanervik, no espectral analausa, no drone controller. She walked past millions of credits worth of archaeological equipment without glancing at any of it, sat down on the cold floor in front of a single blade, and wrote. Gwen followed her with the official recording equipment strapped to her back, feeling ridiculous. She filmed Nadia sitting motionless for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, staring at a weapon behind stasis glass. Then Nadia would lean forward slightly, close her eyes, and begin writing in fast, tight strokes. Page after page. On the fourth day, Gwen worked up the courage to read over Nadia's shoulder. She expected measurements, chemical compositions, classification numbers. Instead, she found this. Blade 7, row 3. A woman. Young. She was left-handed and she laughed loudly, and she was terrified of what was coming, but she made this anyway, because she needed something to survive after she did not. The metal remembers the heat of her hands. She was singing while she forged it. A lullaby. Gwen pulled back. Her heart was beating very fast, and she did not understand why. Director Brune understood even less. He called Nadia to his office after reviewing her first weekly report and stood behind his desk with all four arms folded, which was the Paliki equivalent of shouting. "This is not archaeology," he said, holding up the pages. "This is fiction. The compact requires metallurgical data, dimensional analysis, classification codes. I cannot submit poetry." Nadia sat across from him, calm and still. "Your researchers did not break down because the blades are made of unusual metal," she said. "They broke down because the Rethani forged these weapons using a biological bonding process. The wielder's own neurochemistry was fused into the steel during creation. Every blade in that vault contains a partial biochemical imprint of the person who made it." Brune's mandibles went very still. "That is not possible. Run a deep molecular scan on any blade in row 3. You will find traces of neurotransmitter analogs bonded at the atomic level to the iron lattice. Your scanners missed it because they were looking for standard metallurgical signatures. They were not looking for emotions preserved in metal." Brune stared at her for a long time. Then he ordered the scan. It took 2 hours. The results matched exactly what Nadia had described, that he sat down slowly. "How did you know?" "I felt it," Nadia said simply. "The moment I walked into the vault. Humans can do this. Not because we are special, because we come from a world that kills everything on it constantly, and we evolved to read emotional states as a survival mechanism. We feel what other creatures felt. Not perfectly, not like telepathy, more like walking into a room where someone has been crying and knowing it, even though the room is empty. And these blades, they're not empty rooms. They are rooms where someone died screaming, and the scream was recorded into the walls." That afternoon, Nadia did something that made every protocol officer in the repository lose their minds. She opened a stasis case, reached inside, and picked up a Rethani blade with her bare hands. Gwen was standing 3 meters away. She saw it happen. Nadia's fingers closed around the handle, and her entire body went rigid. Her pupils dilated until her brown eyes were almost black. A thin line of blood appeared at her left nostril. She held the blade for 11 seconds. Then she set it down gently, wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and began writing. "A parent," she said while she wrote, her voice flat and distant. a soldier. They knew they would not survive the next battle. They had 2 children, small ones. They could not bear the thought of being forgotten. So they forged this blade and folded everything they felt into the metal. Their love, their fear, the sound of their children's voices. They wanted something to outlast them, something that would carry the weight of how much they loved their family after their body was gone. She looked up at Gwen. Her eyes were red and wet. This blade is not a weapon. It is a goodbye letter written in steel. Gwen's recording equipment captured everything. The data, the readings, the blood on Nadia's upper lip. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Gwen played it back and watched the moment Nadia touched the blade 14 times, and on the 15th viewing, Gwen finally understood something that changed the way she saw humans forever. Nadia had known it would hurt. She had known before she reached into that case that the blade would flood her with 4,000 years of compressed grief. She knew it would make her bleed. She picked it up anyway. Not because she was brave, not because she was tough, because someone had to listen to what the dead were trying to say, and she was the only one in the room who could hear them. Gwen turned off the recording and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about a species that evolved on a world so brutal it taught them to carry other people's pain inside their own bodies, and how they did not consider this a curse. They called it a job. Gwen stopped counting the blades. After the first 100.3 weeks into the work, Nadia had handled over 200 Rethani weapons, and her notebook had grown into a stack of loose pages held together with a rubber band. Each page held the story of a person dead for 4 millennia. Not dry biographical data. Real stories. A fisher who carved wave patterns into her blade's handle because she missed the sound of the sea. A teacher who forged his weapon thin and light because he hated violence but loved his students enough to stand between them and what was coming. 2 sisters who made their blades on the same night, side by side, and the metal of both weapons carried the echo of their laughter. Nadia read them all. Every one. She sat with each blade, held it in her bare hands, let the grief and love and terror wash through her, and then she wrote down what she found IT was destroying her. Gwen saw it happening day by day. Nadia ate less. She slept in short, broken intervals, waking in the middle of the night, cycle, gasping for air. Dark circles deepened under her eyes. Sometimes between sessions, she sat alone in the corridor outside the vault with her palms pressed hard against her closed eyes, breathing in careful, measured counts. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out. Again. Point 1 evening, Gwen found her there and sat down beside her on the cold floor. Do you need medical attention? Gwen asked. Nadia lowered her hands. Her eyes were bloodshot. She smiled, and the smile was tired but real. No, this is the process. Feeling it is the work. If I stop feeling it, I could not do the work. That does not seem healthy. It is not. Humans who do this job have the shortest careers of any profession on Earth. Average working life is 8 years before you have to stop. How many years have you been doing this? 7. Gwen did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they sat together in the quiet corridor while the weight of 4,000 years of dead people pressed against the vault door behind them. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening above ground. Director Brune had begun sharing excerpts from Nadia's catalog with colleagues across the compact of civilized species. He told himself it was for academic review. In truth, he could not stop reading the entries, and he needed someone else to understand why. The response stunned him. A Maori cultural minister wept openly during a diplomatic call after Brune read her the entry about the 2 sisters. A Paliki naval commander, a being who had served in 3 border conflicts without showing any visible emotion, requested a copy of the full catalog and then sat in his office for an entire day reading it. Compact archivists who had dismissed the Rethani for centuries as another extinct warlike species, no unique cultural value, began submitting formal requests to visit the repository. The Rethani had been dead for 4,000 years. Nadia was bringing them back to life 1 blade at a time, and the galaxy was paying attention. But then the scanners found the inner vault that IT was behind a sealed secondary door at the deepest point of the chamber, hidden beneath a layer of collapsed stone that the original survey team had assumed was natural. A routine structural scan revealed the door. When Brune sent a drone through a gap in the stonework to survey what lay beyond, the drone's sensors overloaded within 30 seconds and it crashed. They sent a second drone, hardened against electromagnetic interference. It lasted 90 seconds, long enough to transmit a single panoramic image before its navigation systems failed and it flew directly into a wall. The image showed a chamber the size of a cathedral. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with blades. Not hundreds, thousands, arranged in vast spiraling patterns that converged on a single point at the center of the room where a small pedestal held one final object. The image was too distorted to identify it clearly, but it appeared to be a single small knife. The emotional interference readings from beyond the sealed door were off every scale the repository possessed, 3 times higher than anything in the outer vault. Whatever was in that room had driven 2 military-grade drones insane in less than 2 minutes. Brune called a meeting. He wanted to seal the inner vault permanently, weld the door shut, and noted in the records as too dangerous for study. Nadia said no. She said it quietly, sitting at the back of the conference room, but the words stopped every conversation in the room dead. Whatever is behind that door is the reason the Rethani died, she said. Not the species. The people. The actual individual people who lived and loved and were so terrified they poured themselves into metal. If we seal that door, we lose the truth. We let them disappear again, and they have been disappeared long enough. Brune asked her what she proposed. I go in, she said. Alone. Gwyn looked at Nadia across the conference table. She saw the dark circles, the trembling hands, the weight of 200 dead strangers already pressing down on a body that was running out of strength. And she saw something else. Something in Nadia's eyes that was not exhaustion or determination or bravery. That it was obligation. The same look Gwyn had seen on the face of every parent who ever stepped between their child and danger. Not because they were not afraid, because the fear did not matter as much as the thing they were protecting. Nadia was going to walk into a room that broke machines because she had promised the dead she would listen, and humans, Gwyn was learning, did not break their promises. The argument lasted 3 hours. Director Brune used every protocol in the repository's charter to block Nadia from entering the inner vault. Safety codes, liability regulations, a medical fitness requirement that he invented on the spot and tried to pass off as standard procedure. Nadia sat through all of it with her hands folded on the table, patient as stone, and when he finished, she pulled a single page from her contract and slid it across the desk. Clause 14, Section C. The cultural grief specialist retains sole discretion over contact methodology in all matters relating to emotional artifact assessment. Brune read it twice. His mandibles clicked in a pattern Gwyn had never heard before. Frustration mixed with something that might have been fear. If you die in there, he said, the compact will shut us down. If I do not go in there, Nadia replied, you have already lost everything worth keeping open for. She stood up and walked out. The meeting was over. Gwyn caught her in the corridor. I am coming with you. Nadia stopped. No. Someone has to witness it. Someone who is not human. Otherwise, the compact will say you made it all up. You need a non-human observer to verify your findings. Nadia studied her for a long moment. Gwyn was half her height and shaking visibly, but she did not look away. It will be the worst thing you have ever felt, Nadia said. I know. I cannot promise I can protect you from it. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to let me stand next to you while you do something no one else can. Something shifted in Nadia's expression. A crack in the exhaustion. A flicker of something warm. Okay, she said softly. Stay close to me. They entered the inner vault at 0600 the next morning. Brune watched from the monitoring station with a medical team on standby and his hands wrapped so tightly around the edge of the console that his exoskeleton creaked. The sealed door took 4 minutes to cycle open. The air that came through was not cold like the outer vault. It was heavy, thick. Gwyn's first stood straight up and a sound filled her ears that was not really a sound. It was more like pressure, like standing at the bottom of a deep ocean and feeling the weight of all the water above you pressing down on every part of your body at once. The chamber opened before them. It was enormous. The drone's panoramic image had not done it justice. The walls rose in curved tiers, every surface covered with blades arranged in spiraling patterns that drew the eye inward and downward toward the center. Thousands of them. The light from their helmet lamps caught the metal and sent reflections spinning across the ceiling like scattered stars. To the center of the room, on a plain stone pedestal, sat a single small knife. No ornamentation, no markings, just a short blade and a worn handle. Gwen made it 4 steps into the chamber before her legs gave out. The weight hit her like a wall. Not physical force. Emotion. Raw, unfiltered 4,000-year-old emotion pouring out of every blade, on every wall, concentrated by the spiral pattern into a single focused point at the center of the room. Grief so vast it had texture. Terror so deep it had temperature. And underneath it all, something Gwen had no word for in any language she spoke. A feeling so large it filled the entire space and pressed against her ribs from the inside. She hit the floor on her knees, gasping, her vision blurred with tears that she could not explain because they were not hers. Nadia caught her. Strong hands gripped Gwen's shoulders and held her steady. Nadia knelt beside her, and Gwen could see through her tears that Nadia's nose was already bleeding and her face was wet, but her voice was steady. "Breathe. I have you. Let me carry it." Gwen felt it then. A shift, like a door opening between them. The crushing pressure eased, not completely, but enough. Nadia was absorbing it, pulling the emotional weight away from Gwen and into herself. Her body shook with the effort. The blood from her nose dripped onto the stone floor. "Stay here," Nadia whispered. "Watch me." She stood and walked toward the center of the chamber. Each step was harder than the last. Gwen could see it in the way Nadia's shoulders bent forward, in the way her breathing turned shallow and ragged, in the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every blade she passed added its voice to the chorus, and the chorus was screaming. She reached the pedestal. She looked down at the small knife. She reached out and picked it up. Nadia's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened. No sound came out for a long moment. Then she sank to her knees, holding the knife against her chest with both hands, and she spoke in a voice that did not sound entirely like her own. They did not destroy themselves in war. The words echoed in the cathedral chamber. They destroyed themselves in mourning. The blades are not weapons. They are memorials. Every blade in this room was forged by a parent who lost a child. A plague swept their world. It took the young first. The parents had no way to save them, so they used the only craft they knew. They forged steel and bonded their own grief into the metal. Every blade is a funeral. Every blade is a parent saying, "I will not let you be forgotten." Nadia was weeping openly now, holding the small knife, rocking slightly on her knees. The wars came later, not from hatred, from grief so heavy it drove them mad. They had no way to carry it. No songs, no rituals, no one trained to hold the pain and keep breathing. The grief ate them alive. She looked down at the small knife in her hands. This was the last one. The very last Rethani alive made this blade. And the message they put into the steel was simple. Nadia closed her eyes. Blood ran from both nostrils now. "We love them. We love them so much it killed us." She fell forward. Gwen screamed her name and crawled across the stone floor toward her. The medical alarms blared. Drones launched from the entrance. But Gwen reached her first, pressing her small furred body against Nadia's side, holding the human who had just carried 4,000 years of dead parents' grief inside her chest so that someone, anyone, would finally hear what they had been trying to say. The blades watched from the walls. Silent. Remembered at last. For 2 days, Nadia did not open her eyes. Gwen refused to leave the medical bay. Brune ordered her back to her quarters twice, and she ignored him both times, sitting in a chair beside Nadia's bed with her recording equipment in her lap, watching the steady rise and fall of the human's chest beneath the thin medical blanket. The monitors showed stable vitals. Heart rate slightly elevated. Neural activity cycling through patterns the Paliki doctors said they had never seen in any species. Deep waves of processing, as if her brain were sorting through a vast library, filing each piece carefully into its proper place on the morning of the 3rd day. Nadia opened her eyes and said, I need my notebook. Gwen almost fell out of her chair. She scrambled to the side table where she had placed the notebook 2 days ago and handed it over. Nadia sat up slowly, wincing, took the pencil, and began to write. She wrote for 7 hours straight. She did not eat. She drank water only when Gwen held a cup to her lips. The pencil moved in tight, fast lines across page after page, and when one pencil wore down, Gwen found another. By the time Nadia finally stopped, she had filled 43 pages with the complete story of the Rethani people as told by their dead. Brune assembled the review panel via HoloLink that same evening. 12 compact representatives from 9 different species sat in glowing projection around the medical bay, while Nadia, still in her hospital gown with medical patches on her temples, presented her findings. She spoke simply. She always spoke simply. That was one of the things Gwen had learned to admire about her. Nadia never used complicated words when plain ones would carry the meaning. The Rethani did not fail because they were violent, she said. They failed because they loved their children and had no way to survive losing them. A plague struck their world roughly 4,200 years ago. It targeted juveniles. Within a single generation, an entire civilization of parents watched their children die. They had no mechanism for processing grief on that scale. No cultural framework, no rituals, no trained specialists. She paused. The room was completely silent. So they did what they knew how to do. They were metal workers, the finest in their region of space. They forged blades and used a biological bonding technique to fuse their own neurochemistry into the steel. It was not a weapon-making tradition. It was a funeral rite. They were trying to preserve their love for their children in the only permanent material they trusted. They wanted something to outlast their own deaths, something that would carry the memory of what they felt. In the wars? Asked a compact representative, a tall, blue-skinned Orvithide diplomat. The grief drove them to madness. When you cannot process loss, it does not disappear. It compounds. It turns inward. It becomes rage, and the rage needs somewhere to go. They turned on each other not because they were enemies, but because they were all drowning in the same ocean and there was nothing to hold on to. The Orvithai leaned forward. You are saying they destroyed themselves because of love? I am saying they destroyed themselves because they had no way to carry their love after the thing they loved was taken from them. Humans have a word for this. We call it complicated grief. On Earth, it is a recognized condition. We have trained professionals, medicine, cultural practices, entire institutions dedicated to helping people survive the loss of someone they love. She looked around the room at the 12 alien faces watching her from their projected seats. How many of your species have the same? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Gwen had ever heard that a Paliki cultural minister finally spoke. We do not experience loss in the way you describe. Our species processes death through logical acceptance. Nadia nodded gently. And when logical acceptance is not enough, when the loss is so vast that logic cannot hold it. The minister did not answer. She did not need to. Everyone in the room was thinking about the 3 repository researchers who had been carried out of the vault with their minds shattered. Humans are not superior because we suffer better, Nadia said. We are useful because we evolved on a planet that taught us to carry pain without letting it destroy us. That is not a gift. It is scar tissue. We earned it by burying our dead for 100,000 years and getting up the next morning anyway. She straightened in her bed, and despite the hospital gown and the medical patches and the dark circles under her eyes, she looked like the strongest person Gwen had ever seen. I am proposing a new branch of the repository. Not a catalog of dead civilizations, but a study of why they died. Staffed by human grief specialists working alongside researchers from every compact species. We teach what we know, the breathing exercises, the morning songs, the funeral rites, the 1,000 small technologies that humans built over 100 millennia to survive the thing that killed the Rethani. Brune spoke for the first time. How many humans would volunteer for this? Nadia looked at him. All of us, she said. Every single human who hears what happened to the Rethani will want to help make sure it never happens again. That is also what we are. We run toward the grief, not away from it. We always have. Gwyn watched from her chair as the 12 representatives looked at each other across their hololinks. She could see on their faces, not just agreement, something deeper, something that looked like the first moment of understanding between species that had never truly seen each other before. The vote was unanimous. 6 months changed everything. The inner vault of the Rethani was no longer a sealed tomb. The collapsed stone had been cleared. The massive door stood open permanently now, its locking mechanism removed and placed in a display case near the entrance with a small plaque that read, "This door kept silence for 4,000 years." A human opened it. Inside, the cathedral chamber had been transformed. The spiraling blades remained exactly where they had always been, thousands of them lining the curved walls from floor to ceiling, but now each blade had a small illuminated placard mounted beside it. A name, a story, a life recovered from the steel by a woman with a notebook and the willingness to bleed. Visitors came from across the compact. Not archaeologists, not weapons specialists, ordinary people from dozens of species who traveled to Dullhaven because they had heard that somewhere underground there was a room where you could stand among the last words of an entire civilization and understand, for the first time, what it meant to lose everything you loved. Human grief specialists guided them through. 12 had arrived in the first month after the vote. Then 30 more. Then 100. They came from every continent on Earth, carrying their own notebooks, their own training, their own scars. They stood beside visitors who wept without knowing why and said the same thing Nadia had said to Gwyn on the floor of the inner vault. "Breathe. I have you. Let me carry it." Gwyn Tallis was no longer a junior archaeologist. She was the first non-human trainee in the Compact's new cultural grief response program, and she wore that title with a seriousness that would have surprised the small, frightened researcher who had stood behind observation glass watching a colleague scream just 8 months ago. She could not feel what the humans felt, not the way they felt it. Her miry neurology was not built for that depth of empathic processing, but she had learned to recognize the signs, the slight tremor in the hands, the distant focus of the eyes, the moment when a grief specialist shifted from observing to absorbing. She knew when to step forward with water, when to speak softly, when to simply stand close enough that the human could feel another heartbeat nearby. She had learned this from Nadia, who had learned it from Earth, which had learned it from 100,000 years of burying the dead and refusing to let them be forgotten that on a quiet afternoon in the 6th month. Gwyn found Nadia standing in the center of the inner vault near the pedestal where the small knife rested under a soft, warm light. A group of young Paliki students stood in a semicircle around her. Brune species. They were tall and thin, and their 4 arms hung at their sides, and their eyes were wide with something that was not quite fear and not quite wonder. Nadia was talking. Her voice was calm and clear, the way it always was when she was teaching. The dark circles under her eyes had faded slightly, though they would never fully disappear. Her notebook was tucked under her arm. A new one. The old one was in the repository's permanent collection now, displayed in a case of its own near the vault entrance. Every civilization leaves a message, Nadia was saying. When they build, when they write, when they sing, when they forge steel, they're saying something. Most of the galaxy reads those messages as data. Composition, dimensions, classification. Humans read them as stories. She reached out and touched the glass case that now protected the small knife. The last blade, the final message of the last Rethani. And stories, she said, unlike data, can make you weep. That is not a flaw. That is the point. When you weep for someone you never met, someone who died before your species even reached the stars, you are doing the most important thing any living creature can do. You are refusing to let them be alone in their pain. One of the Paliki students raised a trembling arm. Does it ever stop hurting? The empathy, the feeling. Does it get easier? Nadia smiled. It was the same tired, warm, unbreakable smile that Gwyn had seen on the first day they met. No, she said, and that is also the point. The day I stop hurting is the day I stop hearing them. And they have waited long enough to be heard. The students were quiet after that. Some of them were crying. They did not know they could do that. Paliki emotional response research would later identify this moment as the first recorded instance of empathic grief transfer in their species. It would change their psychology textbooks forever. Gwyn watched from the doorway of the chamber, leaning against the ancient stone frame, and thought about what she had learned in 6 months beside a human. The galaxy was full of species that were stronger than humans. Faster, smarter, longer-lived. Species with better technology, sharper senses, tougher bodies. Species that could calculate trajectories in their heads and breathe underwater and communicate through light patterns visible across star systems. But none of them could do what Nadia did. None of them could walk into a room full of 4,000-year-old grief and say, "I hear you. I will carry this. I will remember." Humans could, not because evolution had been kind to them, because evolution had been cruel, and they had taken that cruelty and turned it into the one thing the galaxy needed most. The ability to stand in the middle of someone else's worst moment and not look away. A chime sounded from Brune's office channel. Gwyn answered it. New shipment. Relics from another dead civilization, freshly discovered on a rim-ward planet. Preliminary scans showed high emotional residue. Brune was requesting a grief specialist. Gwyn looked across the chamber at Nadia, who was kneeling now, eye level with the smallest Paliki student, holding one of the young alien's 4 hands and saying something too quiet to hear. She waited until Nadia looked up. Their eyes met across the room. Gwyn held up her communicator and tilted her head toward the corridor. Nadia nodded. She squeezed the student's hand, rose to her feet, picked up her notebook, and tucked it under her arm. Gwyn turned and walked toward the new vault. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Human footsteps, steady and unhesitating. The blades on the walls caught the light one last time as Nadia passed beneath them. 4,000 years of silence, finally broken. 4,000 years of love, finally heard. And somewhere in the steel, if you listen very carefully, you could almost hear the Rethani whisper, "Thank you, someone remembered." The Yendi,